The Landscape of a Heart, an audio novel. Copyright 2020 by R.P. Watts. Prologue. Vivid dreams had always been a part of Matthew Blair's life. Whether dreams about his beloved Stephanie, his family, or things that he simply couldn't explain, he always felt so immersed in the dream that it was hard to tell if these experiences were a dream or a living memory. Not that what he dreamt was unusual or strange by any comparison to any other dreamer's dream. Matt never considered he was different than anyone else due to his dreams. He assumed everyone experienced a similar thing, dreams being vibrant and at times ambiguously prophetic. As he lay in bed, far from home tonight, this one tore him from his slumber. The dream was too familiar. What was it about a dream that made it so striking? Was it the visual? Yes. Was it the emotion? The feeling the dream imbued? Yes. Was it that strange sense of déjà vu? Yes. There were times in Matt's life when he dreamt about things that had not yet happened. Not big things. He was no Nostradamus. The things he appeared to predict seemed to be déjà vu, or perhaps just dumb luck. Minor things that could be attributed to just knowing the patterns of your own life. For instance, Matt's sister Amy was up every morning before him when they were young. She was an early bird. Often, she would taunt him about his sleeping in. He could have predicted the incident on any of those mornings when she was 8. She would hang in his doorway, telling him to wake up, lazy butt. He was all too familiar with this pattern in his life. And perhaps his subconscious was just more aware of these patterns and expressed that in his dreams. This is exactly what Matt believed. But how deep the subconscious looked through the layers of reality and perception, and just how much it took notes on, was something Matt had not quite yet understood. Others Matt had spoken to on the subject hadn't had dreams in the way Matt had. Or at least, they didn't remember. Or maybe their subconscious didn't look as deep into things as Matt's did. Or the explanation was something crazier and less easy to accept. Maybe our dreams are events from our past lives, Matt had considered previously. Or maybe dreams are future lives. Perhaps there are different variances of the universe, different based on the choices and decisions made. The mind is simply able to steal glimpses of the dissenting visions. Whenever your mind was having trouble coming to terms with something, it looks into other possibilities to put itself at ease. Maybe it eased your subconscious, planting the thought, hey, the alternative's not that great. Or, wow, that's not at all how I'd wish things were to turn out, if there were unintended consequences. Or maybe the mind dreams in this fashion in order to simply torture itself in some self-sacrificing manifestation of guilt. Of course, there's also the possibility it was just an arbitrary exercise of imagination. Matt had not thought his dreams made him special. Matt's dreams were, nevertheless, extreme. The one he just awoke from was no different. He wanted to go back to it. He wanted to understand. Matt closed his eyes and tried to return to his vision. He couldn't get back to the place. It was familiar, but not home. Or at least not any place Matt remembered. Nevertheless, the familiarity was shocking. The people in the dream he didn't recognize, but their presence gave him comfort. He had said something in the dream. He didn't know what it meant. What he could remember of it was vague, but powerful. The visual. It was like he was in some sort of temple. At a peak in the temple, sort of resembling a castle tower. It was night. There was a warm fire in front of him. The architecture seemed ancient, the stone worn. There was another man sitting near the fire with him. The man's face was familiar. He was waiting for a response from him, as if he had just asked a question. Matt felt sorrow, extreme sorrow, for the man in the dream. He had to let the other man down with some horrible revelation. There was anticipation in the other man's face. He was eager to hear what Matt had to say. But what he said, he did not understand, even as he said it. What Matt said was so vague that he could hardly remember it. What he said could mean anything. Was he answering a question? Was he telling a story? Who were they in this dream anyway? Was there just not enough context to understand? Matt had not recognized the other man, but again, his face was so familiar. And his reaction, it affected Matt both in the dream and out. When he said the words in the dream, the other man seemed devastated. But still, Matt wondered, what did it mean? Why did he say those words? Why did they strike him so? He was always called analytical, an overthinker. But what was it about this dream? Even the words he could use to describe it wouldn't do it justice. It was like he had been there, but he hadn't. It was like explaining how music sounded or how sex felt. He didn't know the other man in the dream. He didn't recognize the ancient building they were in, and he didn't know what the words that he uttered could possibly mean. Matt felt perplexed. Maybe it was due to the trauma he had just been through, the gunshot wounds, his deployment. That was it. That was why he was having the dream, and why he cared so much about it. The dream was recognizable and somehow just as comfortable as it was terrifying. As Matt lay in his unfamiliar bed, he welcomed the relatable. After what he had just been through and the long weeks in the hospital, this was one of the most comfortable experiences he had had since he left home. In 3 days, Matt would finally be released from the military hospital and sent home to Maryland. He would be rejoined with his family, his father and mother, and his sister. He had that to look forward to. And in the late hours of the night, his thoughts turned towards this. He would be going home. Matt looked up at the shadows on the ceiling. At the foot of his bed, the curtain was open. The room housed about 8 other patients that had been injured in the WPF affairs in the region. Many were wounded, much worse than he. But Matt did not yet have the strength to get up unattended. He was restless, but had to remain still, confined. The tightness in his chest reminded him of his captivity. He couldn't roll over. Matt closed his eyes. The dream. What did it mean? He couldn't let it go. He couldn't understand his fixation on the dream, or perhaps the fixation it had on him. Matt was obsessed with the tone of the character's voice in the dream, the depth, the dialogue, the accent, and the importance, the mystery of what it meant. He just couldn't reach it. "No," Matt said in the dream. "We have only made what was. What was." It felt so important. In exhaustion and defeat, Matt closed his eyes and slept. Stay tuned next week for Chapter 1 of The Landscape of a Heart. Memory.